Welcome to Putting It Together, the podcast that goes through the entire body of work of Stephen Sondheim, show by show and song by song. My name is Kyle Marshall, your self-described Sondheim expert. Now, normally, yes, we are going through sequentially the whole body of work of Stephen Sondheim, but once each month, because of the generous donations from our people over at Patreon, I'm allowed to do a bonus episode. This month, we are focusing on James Lapine and something from his oeuvre that we can discuss that is somewhat tangentially related to Stephen Sondheim's career. And with me today is Christopher Lewis. Thank you so much for coming back.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. How are you?
I'm doing very well.
I'm glad.
I should just ask you right here up front, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about James Lapine's, I think it's 1991 film, Impromptu.
It was a time of music, poetry, and romance when artists were idolized as gods. And Madame George Sand was scandalizing Paris with her illicit love affairs.
Madame George Sand is quite brazenly inviting herself to the fortnight. You know the one. She wears men's clothes and leads the most depraved life imaginable. I'm dying to meet her.
Has anyone ever met this Duchess?
George, you'll want to sit over here, my
Here
dear.
is the million-dollar question. Before asking you to be a guest on this episode, have you ever heard of this movie in your life?
No, I wasn't even aware James Lapine directed movies. I didn't know, don't want to give anything away, but I will be looking up his other work.
So here is the thing. Of the 4 theatrically released films that he has directed, he is like the epitome of a director, movies that don't exist. Meaning, like, those are famous people. That is something that came out in theaters. There is no memory of this ever being an actual thing, except for one.
He directed a movie with Viola Davis that came out, like, post-Oscar.
Like 4 years ago. Like, it's, like, crazy to me.
It's like, where was I?
Yeah.
That's, like, I am clued into Viola. That's pretty strange that I was, like, never heard of it.
Never heard of it. And it's like available nowhere. So it's weird. The only one I was going to say that people may have heard of, depending on your age, is Life with Mikey, which is a Michael J. Fox film from the 90s as well. And I only remember it because of the VHS cover that was at my Blockbuster for years. Never seen it. I should just point out, never seen this movie.
Scratching my head on Life with Mikey. What's it about?
I have no idea.
I know you've
never watched
seen
it.
No, you don't even know. You never even glanced at the back of the box.
No. Sometimes, you go into, like when there was movie rental places, maybe it's a bookstore. It's like, I'm never going to engage with that and just keep on walking.
So during the height of the pandemic in 2020, my treat to myself was to go to the bookstore and I would do no research but browse and buy one book a week to read that solely based off of the cover. I would never do that with movies because I find movie posters are like, you just never know. You can't look at, there's no relationship to what the movie is about to what you're getting on that poster.
I think I was just so inoculated by, well, you don't know this, but I was kind of like a pro gamer in my young days.
And what is that?
Sega Genesis. That's not true. I'm just saying that in the 80s, the video game art was so vastly not representative of what was actually in the video game that it's just like, it looks cool, but it probably isn't going to be anything like this.
I love that my only context for this is like Super Mario was on, he's on the cover of his games.
I just remember because I was a big fantasy RPG fan, and all of those are like these like very muscly men with like busting out of their tops and everything, like swinging on a rope, escaping a dragon, and it's like it's 8-bit graphics. Like there's not much you can do.
Yeah, it's not much you can do when the character's just like boop boop boop. Yeah, that's fun. Yeah. That's like when I missed video games. Give me back the easy peasy days.
Now, this movie, Impromptu, is about part of the life of George Sand. I am going to ask you 2 questions. First, maybe the impossible task of what is this film about beyond it just being about George Sand?
I have so many notes about what this movie's about. I've got one that it said this movie is about like the intersection of art and society. It's about gender identity. It's about, the politics of like just basic dating, and it's everything. Yeah. It's an everything bagel.
I was going to say that this is not the only James Lapine project that I've engaged with this week that has Bernadette Peters urging someone not to go. There's some weird like Sunday in the Park with George vibes, mostly because Mandy Patinkin and Bernadette Peters both show up in this.
But also like, and I know he didn't really do this show, but we're also getting a little night music in there.
Yeah.
I was like, maybe he wanted to direct a little night music, and he was just like, fuck it, I'll write my own.
I mean, kinda. Like, I mean, it's like, after watching this movie, it's like, I mean, maybe Lapine would have been the worst choice in the 90s to try and do another version of a little night music. I mean, visually, I don't think it's bad.
No,
I'll tell you about my other opinions about this movie later on. But
yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about what it is on the plot on a more granular level, I guess it's about the relationship of all of these artists in this community to one another.
Who are some of those artists that show up?
You know, I don't have a first name on anybody in this movie. We got Chopin.
Yeah, that's
paddling around. I don't know if this is how you pronounce it. Liszt?
Actually, that's a good question. Liszt is how I've always heard it pronounced. Or maybe I'm wrong.
And then who else did we have?
Those are the two famous composers.
And then we had a painter. Then we had Mandy Patinkin, who I believe is a real person, but I never got a name on him.
Yeah, he's a novelist of the time, if I'm not mistaken.
He seemed to be another writer. I don't know that the Bernadette Peters character is a real person.
No. I think it's an amalgam, honestly, of some other people. This is all to say, like, this is what I was leading up to. Do you know anything about the real George Sand?
Before 9 a.m. this morning? No.
So I have to be very upfront with the audience here. For a not insignificant amount of this movie, I was like, they mean George Eliot, right?
Same.
Like that's
I was
that's
like, this is a misnomer. We're calling. I was like, oh, they can't use the name George Eliot. So I was like,
for some reason,
I was like, did the Eliot estate get particularly litigious? Shocked to find it was George Sand is not only a famous writer, but perhaps the most famous writer for a period of time that I studied in college.
Yeah, this is where I have to hang my head in shame that I just do have no in with George Sand as a writer. But just like George Eliot was a woman, George Sand was very well known in the French society because she would walk around wearing men's clothes. And at the time she was writing champion of the poor, of women's rights. She was very much at the forefront of using her writing as a political statement, just like one of her good friends, Victor Hugo, at the time.
Didn't get a lot of her caring about the poor in this movie.
Sure didn't, but that's what her biography says a few different times.
I'm happy to learn more, but she wasn't clued in. The poor seemed to be like less on the totem pole.
I guess sit back for a second here, because I'm just going to go through some of the stuff that I wrote down, because maybe some people out there, like me, just didn't really have any idea of like her importance, which I'm going to blame solely on myself. I maybe should have just known more about this person before watching a movie about them. But until partway through this movie, I was like, this is a completely made up fictional film. I did not actually know that this was like a real thing. George Sand has a few relationships and marriages throughout her life. Although I do like that after her second marriage, she entered into what she called a 5-year period of romantic rebellion.
I feel like I'm in that period.
We've all been there.
No, what does that mean? She was really rebelling, or is it more of a hoe era?
I think it's a nice way of saying it was her hoe era. Yeah,
nice.
She went and slept with a lot of people. This film focuses partly on that time period where she is really jonesing to get with Chopin. Like, that is really who she wants to sleep with, which is a young Hugh Grant, so I kind of get it.
I didn't. I've never found him less sexy. His hair was shut up to the hair and makeup. His hair did not move us for a beat throughout this entire film.
Even in the direct wind, there was no movement on that.
It was a helmet atop his head, but he had no sexual pulse to me in this movie, and I usually love every single Hugh Grant.
Well, I think that that's kind of my main critique of the film here as well, which is Hugh Grant has a very specific set of skills as an actor. Judy Davis is good, but like, I don't feel any sexual chemistry between the two of them, like, at all.
And as you said, Hugh Grant has so many skills, and no one loves him more than me. I've watched Paddington 1 million times. Accent work is not what I would say is his forte. He's no Meryl Streep. And so and I didn't know where he was, because at one I was like, he's French, and then they were like, oh well, no, he's Polish. I was like, well, maybe that's why I'm getting a strange accent from him.
Yeah, I think he's trying something. I don't know how much it was actually working for him, but
I just wished halfway through he had dropped it.
In real life, their on and off relationship goes for about 10 years, like just under 10 years. But in that time, like, they would be together, then they would break up, and she would go with someone, he would go with someone else, then they would come back together. It was one of those kind of like Elizabeth Taylor, Richard Burton sort of relationships, if you know what I mean.
That seems tough to do without cell phones. It just seems tough to circle back without technology.
Think of all the wax you have to use of sending letters. It's a whole process.
And hoping it gets there, just like...
I think that's part of it. It's like, well, good luck, I guess. In 3 months, hopefully this letter shows up for you. She also did have relationships with women. What I couldn't figure out doing my very cursory amount of research here is I don't know how much that was known at the time that she was having relationships with women, but has come out in the years since.
Oh, but we knew that in 1991.
Yes. Yeah, we would have known that.
I felt this movie was so subtextually queer and textually queer that it was like, just go there. Like, let's get at something.
The problem sometimes when you get someone who is not queer to make a film that like begs for it almost. There's so much queer subtext and just text that just is never, I don't know, fleshed out in any real way.
Like Bernadette Peters and George definitely wanted to be together.
Yes, I think that's
would have been
clear.
A power couple.
That's still the case. If I was with Bernadette Peters, I'd feel like I was in a power couple.
Absolutely.
But now this movie, spoiler alert for the end of this movie, but they do go off together in a carriage to spend time in Mallorca. This is widely known to have caused Chopin's health issues to become worse and probably what led to his death. Like, that is basically how this movie ends. If you don't know that, it does feel like it's more of a upbeat ending, I would say.
Well, it does
else.
have like a nice little note at the end where they play it like a joke that she's going to kill him. I thought we were just rooting for their love, and now she's going to murder him.
I know that, like, it's a different time, both, like, 1991 to now and, like, 1880, whatever this is, until now. I can't get over the fact that this is, like, legit stalking for, like, I don't know, 30 minutes of this movie of him basically saying no, 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 and her being like, but you mean yes, and, like, just forcing herself into his life until he finally, like, succumbs.
Well, let's talk about that painter who just like jumped poor Emma Thompson. Yeah. I was like, I mean, thankfully she sort of got with it, but I was like, yikes, what's happening?
Yeah, it's always like the grabbing by the neck and like pulling towards him, like, okay, buddy, like let's settle down here.
Into like a dark room, he's ripping her bodice off. It was a lot.
This is also one of those films that is unfortunate that I'm like so down with all of the supporting cast. I kind of love everything that Bernadette Peters is doing in this movie. Ditto to Emma Thompson. Like, I'm so glad when Emma Thompson shows up anyways in a movie. I'm like, can we just have it be about these people? Because I found them eminently more fascinating than who our main character actually was.
I was very upset when we left the summer house.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, hold on. And I was like, wow, we've got 40 more minutes of this movie and Emma Thompson's out. I don't think I can do it. Then I found my joy in more Bernadette Peters stuff, where they just are like, let's just pivot her into a villain, even though she's sort of set up as her best friend.
Yeah. There's some weird tonal shifts that happen here. Just to do a button here of the real George Sand and Chopin's like love affair, what really put the nail in the coffin is that she would eventually use a caricature of him in one of her novels, which would make him really upset. Eventually, they would have pretty negative feelings about one another, which caused Sand to basically burn most of their letter correspondence. So to this day, we only actually have 4 of the letters that they sent to each other that are still in existence, but supposedly very hot and heavy letters being sent back and forth.
Not a lot of hot and heavy in the movie, as we said.
That is true. Yeah. Anything we want to say about any of that so far?
Historically, just watching the movie, and then, I mean, I didn't do much deep research. I just glanced at a wiki. I sound like Carrie Bradshaw. I couldn't help but wonder, is George Sand like a good writer? Or is she sort of, because not to say you can't be a good writer and write a shit ton of books, but truly at that time, mostly because lifespans were also shorter, when I went and looked, I was expecting to see like 4 books. It's like 75.
Yeah, she wrote so much. Like, she was basically the Stephen King of her time, just as far as like the output that she was making.
And so I was wondering, was she sort of a Stephen King, a James Patterson, like an author who was prolific, but also known for sort of their personality?
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't really, because again, I studied this time period, and at no point was a professor ever like, we got to read some George Sand.
Yeah, I'm actually eminently more fascinated by that. Maybe someone who's just more up to this can write in and fill us in, because for as popular as she was at her time, like there was in her own time, she sold more copies, was far more popular than Victor Hugo was. So I keep using him as the example. A person who we basically do know to this day, at least the name, I think people have recognition for, whether or not they've ever watched A Hunchback of Notre Dame or Les Mis or whatever it happens to be. At least we kind of know Victor Hugo. And I looked through every single title that George Sand wrote, I'm like, I'm not getting any name recognition. So I feel so out of the loop.
Then we got into plays. I was like, okay, I'm going to know at least one play. It was like, nope, none of these.
So I just want to know why it's like fallen that out of fashion, I guess, with her. Maybe there's going to be a reignition of George Sand fans here anytime now.
Or they're all going to come out and be like, you two idiots. Everyone knows about George Sand.
Yeah, everybody knows George Sand.
What did you think of Judy Davis's performance?
I mean, I'll be honest. I wasn't like wowed by it, but I wouldn't say it's a bad performance either. It just felt very flat for me most of the time. And I don't know if that's her performance or that's just how it was written. I think the true issues is there's no chemistry between the two lovers that we have. And it just feels inert after they leave the summer house. Like, my enjoyment of this movie was basically on a huge bell curve. Because as it starts, I'm like, okay, I know some of these actors. This is going to be fun. I'm having so much fun with Emma Thompson and the shenanigans that are happening at the house. And then as soon as they leave that, it's like, I'm just not enjoying most of this at all anymore.
I felt the second half of the movie, post-Summer House, we needed Bette Davis to star in this movie.
Yeah, someone very catty.
Yeah, because it just felt like I need more scheming. I need more like that pure drive. I will like crawl across glass to get this man that she brings to like a movie like Jezebel.
Sure.
That is just completely missing. So to your point, they have no chemistry. And also I'm sort of like, do you even care about this man?
Yeah, I mean, like that, or at the very least, have some type of commentary. Not that it's not there. I guess it's not a lot of her being like very much wearing men's outfits and using that as a provocative way to enter into the society at the time. But then to try and get with Chopin, it's like, I'm going to wear dresses, I'm going to become more feminine. I was like, okay, that's an interesting dialogue you could start to have with gender norms, but that's not really focused on.
But instead, it sort of felt like she was choosing to like play that, like that she had to give up her more pan gender identity to win over this dweeb.
That is also the thing too. It's like, this is probably much more of an interesting character for her to try and get with, or really lean in with her and Mandy Patinkin as her old flame.
Right. I thought we were leading to like a You've Got Mail shop around the corner, like they used to hate each other, but they're coming back, like marriage, like that sort of trope of Philadelphia story. They spar so much, they hate one another so much they have to love each other. Instead, Mandy Patinkin just becomes like a clown trying to ride a horse backwards. Yeah,
gets drunk, rides a horse backwards, tries to do a duel, but that doesn't work out too well.
Or it would have been nice if it had gone like Cruel Intentions, Dangerous Liaison style, and had it be this fierce competition between these two women for who can win him.
Right.
And he is really just this empty prize. And it's about the fact that they're bored as women, as smart women in this society. But instead, it's just like somewhere in between of a lot of stuff.
Yeah, this is my issue with biopics in and of themselves. Is that
would you consider this a biopic?
Ish. I'm going to say it's ish. I only bring that up because you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. Do you stick to what happened in real life? And what usually that means is that it's not as interesting because people's lives don't follow a nice 3-act structure like we want it to. And so it's like, well, we can't have them do this because they didn't actually do it in real life. Or you do change a bunch of stuff, like you said, and like lean into either the campiness of it or into like the diabolicalness of it. And then people get mad because like, well, that's not what George Sand actually did in real life. So it's like, you can never really win in these situations.
This is a strange reference, but this to me, and it's the only movie I can think of, felt like the other Boleyn Girl. Like, yeah, we're taking real people, but we're just going to move them around like dolls on a, like, that we want to play with. Until you said all of that, I was like, I'm sure all of this was made up. That none of these people knew one another. They just picked 6 famous writers and painters and were like, throw them in a house and let's have some fun.
I think I would have enjoyed that movie better, to be honest with you. It's just like, have this be a costume comedy, slamming doors and miscommunications and all that kind of stuff.
Well, it sort of becomes it when we're at the summer house. At certain points, it keeps cutting to black like we're in a sitcom. Like we're going to commercial break. I kept thinking the movie was over.
Titles start coming up, the freeze frame, filmed in front of a live studio audience.
Yeah.
So as we said, George Sand, super popular writer, very popular in Europe. Yes, even more popular than Balzac. They made a very big point in this write-up that I read. She was even more popular than Balzac. Victor Hugo, at her funeral, gives this eulogy. He says, "In this country, whose law is to complete the French Revolution and begin that of the equality of the sexes, being a part of the equality of men, a great woman was needed. It was necessary to prove that a woman could have all the manly gifts without losing any of her angelic qualities, be strong without ceasing to be tender. George Sand proved it."
I'm sure that was a lovely sentiment for whenever he said that, whenever she passed. But if someone said that at a woman's funeral now, we would ride them off. Like, they would just be driven off out of society.
Like, her influence is felt far and wide for decades later. People that reference her work in their work, Dostoevsky, Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Walt Whitman, Marcel Proust, and Virginia Woolf all reference George Sand in their own writings. So that's a quick overview of her.
I wonder when she fell off. Was it like 1910? Everyone was like, get her out of here.
And that's the thing. Like, people do kind of fall in and out of favor. Like, I remember when I was in university taking an English degree, essentially every single professor is like, okay, listen, we're going to touch very briefly on the Freudian reading, but he's really not important anymore. And they would really just blow past it. But he used to be like the biggest thing that you used as a way to like read literature. And now, not so much.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly like concepts change. And the way we approach stuff, like I think I was definitely studying things at the time where authorial intent was no longer important. And it was just like, you can do whatever you think it means is what it means. Stop trying to search for what it actually means.
Right.
But to have this prolific writer and for me to be like, I've never heard these names and have the exact same reaction you did, where I was like, oh, this must be about George Eliot, who I think wrote a total of 6 books.
Right, exactly. Yeah. To jump into the film here more broadly here.
Can I ask a question? What does the title mean? Why is it called this?
Thank you so much for asking. I can actually tell you this because I also did not know.
Oh, really? Because I looked up the musical meaning for Impromptu and that didn't really help me.
Yeah, so here's the thing. A little fun fact that I only found out, within the last 24 hours. So an impromptu is a free-form musical composition with the character of an extempore improvisation as if prompted by the spirit of the moment, usually for a solo instrument such as a piano. So the impromptu, in this case, is actually talking about Chopin.
But what is yes. But what is the larger, like, who else is the impromptu? What's the bigger, how do we branch that out? Is George Sand the impromptu?
I guess so. I think too, like the relationship maybe is impromptu. Like they,
I think it is impromptu in the sense of the word, how we would use it.
Yes, like, I think there's a double meaning. Yeah.
Got it. But it isn't the illusion thing.
No.
It's just impromptu, like she saw him and was like, I love him.
I think it might be all of the above here. I think they're trying to use this word in multiple ways. The fact is this too, is that both Chopin and Liszt are actually known for an impromptu that they wrote. Chopin composed 4 of them, one of the most famous being this one called Fantasy Impromptu, which we'll probably hear a little bit of after I edit this episode together. Even though he left explicit instructions that any unpublished music he wrote did not get published after his death, this one being that was published after his death when they were going through his things. So he didn't want it out there.
We can't respect everyone's wishes.
If anyone knows the old vaudeville song, I'm Always Chasing Rainbows, the same melody is used, which I found a copy sung by Judy Garland, which I'll probably layer in here as well.
I'm always chasing rainbows, watching clouds drifting by. My schemes are just like all my dreams, ending in the sky. Someday
I was Judy. Well, I was going to say
good.
Judy was in
good...
this movie, but that wouldn't be possible.
Wouldn't that be something? List also made his own impromptu. The only one that I could see was the Valse impromptu. That one isn't necessarily highly regarded amongst List fans, but he did make an impromptu as well. I should also say, I think, too, the other interpretation of this is that I think we're supposed to understand that Chopin is just like improvising, doing something on the piano while she's laying underneath it and like absorbing the music in a kind of a weird psychosexual couple scenes that happen that way. So I think that that's also meant to be there, too.
I just got that.
Who hasn't laid under the feet of a pianist?
Who amongst us hasn't had that very specific experience? Did you like this movie?
Yes, with like an ellipsis afterwards. This is one of those movies that I am going to completely forget about in probably a week. Wow. Would I be angry if I was told, like, you have to watch Impromptu again? No, I wouldn't be. But this is not something I'm going to be yearning or ever seek out to watch ever again. So it's like one of those things where it's like, I didn't hate it, but I'm going to forget about it. Versus a movie where I'm going to forget about, but like I truly never want to watch this movie again. Like it wasn't that bad for me.
I'll have to tell you, while watching it, I watched it on the train home from New York today.
Yeah.
And I was never so angry. I was like, why would he ask me to watch this? This is the worst movie I've ever seen. I don't even know why he wants to talk about this. I don't have anything to say about it. And yet I have 5 pages of notes. But it is a tiny notebook, you know?
Right.
And then I got back and about an hour ago, and I knew we were recording. I was like, I got to turn that movie back on. It was like,
there we go. Yeah.
I'm kind of obsessed with this movie. And while it was on, I thought, like, oh, I'll turn it on while I'm like putting clothes away and doing some dishes. I sat down and couldn't take my eyes off of it.
I think it is a fascinating failure in many ways.
Exactly. I was like, what was James Lapine thinking when he did this? And then I got into it. I was like, wow, his wife wrote it. I wonder if she really loves George Sand.
I was going to bring that up too.
And then he was forced to direct this movie because his wife made it. Or I'm like, maybe they just love this?
I steal the phrase, a movie that does not exist, from this other podcast I listen to called Blank Check. And it's some of their favorite
Great
things
movie.
is yes, the movie Blank Check is also weird, but the whole concept being like, maybe it's directed by a really famous director and stars like a really huge star, and yet there's no cultural memory of this movie whatsoever. I actually find those eminently fascinating to dig into, because like there has to be a reason why like nothing about this movie has like survived into the wider culture. Like Hugh Grant was becoming more popular in 1991. Judy Davis was popular.
This movie would have been a huge hit like in 5 years when all of these people are infinitely more famous. They're all right on the precipice of their big moment. And maybe they thought Impromptu was going to be that moment, but it won't.
Sure didn't. I think James Lapine has a very interesting visual style. He mentions the fact that he always wanted to become a film director, so this was his entry point in becoming a film director. If you compare him and Hal Prince, like Hal Prince also tries to get into movie directing and also fails. I think James Lapine has a better visual sense film-wise than Hal Prince does.
Did Hal Prince direct the movie version of A Little Night Music?
Correct.
I think what I would say is that James Lapine has a respect for what a camera is meant to do. Hal Prince got a camera and went buck wild and was just like, let's cut everything. Like, just cut away. That camera never sits still.
That's true.
Whereas I think that, I cannot believe I'm talking about Impromptu with it's Citizen Kane. What I found so great about it is he really trusts his camera to sit still. And then he does what I'm sure he is very good at, as we know, which is creating images and moving people around.
Mm-hmm. He even composes people really interesting, like foreground, midground, background.
Yeah, there's a great shot. I think it's right after Mandy Patinkin has written the play, and he says, like, they're about to do it, and it cuts away from Emma Thompson and her husband to all of them, who would be quote unquote called the geniuses. And if you look at the way they're organized and framed, you can see all of the burgeoning relationships and the past there. And I was like, wow, this is really beautiful. This is the Succession. And then I thought, again, I am watching Impromptu. It's like, what am I... Guys, this movie will get in your head. I want everyone to get their eyes on it.
And here's the thing. At least if you are in North America, you can go to the free service called Tubi. And yes, you'll have to watch, for me, 6 commercial breaks. Luckily, they're like 15 seconds long, so it's not a huge deal.
One of which was about, like, I don't know, you live in Canada.
Yeah,
One which
I
was
would not get the same.
I got a bunch about, like, a cat device.
Oh, yeah, no, I did not get that. But
if I paid 1 cent for this movie, I might not like it as much. But the fact that it was free, it was...
Tubi is so great because it actually has a pretty deep roster of films it has, and it's free. You don't even have to make an account for it if you don't want to. So anyone can go and experience Impromptu, a film that I keep having to reiterate is a film that exists, that was directed by James Lapine and stars Mandy Patinkin, Bernadette Peters, Judy Davis, and Hugh Grant. Like, this is a movie that is there, and it has Emma Thompson in it.
Can I take this to a bit of a dark place?
Sure.
Do you know what happened to the actor who plays List?
No, I don't, actually.
He went missing earlier this year, and his remains were found yesterday. So it was shocking for me to see him.
Whoa. Okay, no idea.
Yeah.
Like he just went hiking or something? Or like he was kidnapped?
And like no one could find him, and then they found his remains just this weekend.
That's awful.
So I had literally taken in that information and then was like, how do I know that guy, that actor's name? And I was like, oh, I was just reading about his remains being found.
Jeez Louise. Being as complimentary as I am with James Lapine, like blocking, composing, the shots and stuff like that, I'll keep coming back. The second half probably need some more prodigious editing, I think, a little bit. It just feels so like lethargic for most of it.
No, I'm going to blame the script on the second half. I felt that we needed like an All About Eve script. Yeah. Like we're getting zen. And I think this movie thinks it's full of zingers. Like the actors are definitely presenting things like they think that's going to end on a t-shirt one day.
Yeah, well, yeah. I will say that this makes me love Bernadette Peters more because you can tell she's bringing in some of her Broadway things. Like, I'm going to goose this line just to try and make it funny a few different times throughout this.
When she said that woman is a graveyard, I thought that's a great line, and Bernadette really sold it.
Oh, yeah.
I think with the exception of Judy Davis, everyone in this movie, well, with the exception of our 2 leads, Judy Davis and Hugh Grant, I think everyone in this movie is exceptional.
Yeah, I like on paper, this should be like one of my favorite things. And honestly, within the first 20 minutes, I'm like, if this keeps building, this might become one of my favorite things. And then kind of just falls a little bit flat here for me. To give some more background here as far as the film goes, we've kind of already said this. This film is written by Sarah Kernochan, the wife of James Lapine. She is also a novelist, playwright, documentarian. She has 2 Oscars. Did you know this? For her documentaries, which I would tell you now if I had written their names down.
I was like, if you say she won an Oscar for Best Screenplay for Impromptu.
No. She won the Golden Globe. She's even released an album of original music, which I thought was interesting.
Wow, what a queen.
Wrote this, maybe you know this musical. This has no name recognition for me either. She wrote the musical called Sleep Around Town. Does this ring any bells?
No.
It's actually not that old of a show either. Like, it was in the 2010s that this came out. It's about puberty that starred adolescent actors. So
Did it hit Broadway?
No, I think this was like off Broadway is what this was. So she also co-wrote What Lies Beneath, starring Harrison Ford.
Are you fucking kidding me? I was literally just talking about What Lies Beneath.
A movie that I actually quite like.
I talk about blockbuster. I was written What Lies Beneath every which way at the age of like 8.
I don't know. I was gonna make this bold statement. Probably the last time that a movie was sold on Harrison Ford being like hunky, like attractive, because this was getting into his like late 50s.
You don't think the new Indiana Jones movie is being sold on his hotness?
No, that is a fully 80-year-old man at this point.
Shrinking?
Shrinking? Yes. Look how hot Harrison Ford is in this movie.
I'm trying to think. Was that the last? What was the one where he was on the plane?
Air Force One?
Was he the president in that movie? If it's
Air Force One that you're talking about, that was a few years before that.
Okay.
Unless you're talking about K-19, The Widowmaker, but that's a sub. So
no, that's a sub directed by Catherine Bigelow.
Correct. Yes.
And I'd say that's Liam Neeson, though, isn't it?
No, that is Harrison Ford in K-19 doing a very, very bad Russian accent, I will say, too. But
maybe I've never seen that movie, actually, because now I'm like, what are you talking about?
What Lies Beneath? It's a Robert Zemeckis movie that was only made because they had to shut down Castaway for 6 months for Tom Hanks to lose weight. So he's like, I might as well make this movie in the 6 months we have to close down.
Robert Zemeckis directed that?
Yes.
That erotic ghost thriller?
This is a Zemeckis joint, yeah.
It was all downhill after that. Then he went to the uncanny valley on that train.
I agree. I would say that What Lies Beneath and Castaway are his last legitimately good
Although
movies.
I liked Flight.
Oh, you're right. I'm totally on with it. I'm a Flight defender, where a lot of people say that it's not good.
I forget that Flight is by him, and I thought John Goodman should have won an Oscar for Flight.
Yeah, well, John Goodman I don't think he's even been nominated before, which is a crime.
It's criminal. And I wish he was in Impromptu. He
should have played George Sand.
He would have been fantastic in whatever that wig they slapped on her. Have you ever seen Judy Davis in the Judy Garland story?
I have not. No,
that's a performance. That's where I found her as a kid. I was like watching that and I was like, this woman can really act. Currently,
Sarah Kernochan, she's working on a new musical to be directed by her husband, James Lapine, called... Did you read this?
Mm-mm.
Nancy Drew and the Mystery of Spotlight Manor. So she's making a Nancy Drew musical.
She's really got esoteric taste, this lady.
I know, but she's like all over the map. I find her fascinating. I want to know so much about her.
And she writes the music and the lyrics?
No, she's only the book writer in this case. So it's Alan Menken and Neil Benjamin who are doing music and lyrics.
And James is like, I'll just direct.
Even if it's a car crash, I'm so interested in what a Nancy Drew musical on Broadway is going to be.
No, and with music by Alan Menken, I'll be there. I'm sure I think we're starting in New Jersey, but we'll try to get
there
across
eventually.
The bridge.
You can blame this movie partly on the writer's strike of 1988. Kernochan herself was laid off from what she was doing. And she becomes increasingly intrigued by this one question that keeps going through her mind, which is, how do complicated people find a simple way of loving? So she just, I'm just reading what I've read. She decides,
and this is what that was this movie is the answer to that question.
Then she glances over at her bookshelf and is like, George Sand. And then she writes a screenplay. A producer by the name of Stuart Aukin likes the project, agrees to give them some money to fund this. James Lapine is a first-time director, so they get him for super cheap in order to feel comfortable as his first time being a movie director. So he just hires all the people he's worked with before. The film barely makes an impact. I have no idea what its budget was. It made $4 million at the box office in 1991.
Well, that's good because it looks like it cost about $17.50 to make.
It has 2 sets that it keeps going back.
Yeah, and I swear I saw the craft services like just in the background at one point. Like $4 million, that's a hit for this.
For this one, yeah. I can't imagine this, being more than I don't even know how much this would have cost to make in 1991. I have no frame of reference. The one award this does win is that Judy Davis wins an Independent Spirit Award for Best Lead Actress for this.
And nothing for Bernadette.
Nothing. Just bupkis.
Criminal.
So if everyone can't figure this out, you should definitely go and watch Impromptu.
I'm honestly, I might finish it. Like I was in the middle of it when we had to start. And I do think I'm going to hit play. And
listen, it's not even that big of a time commitment. It's like an hour 45, I think, is how long this movie is. It's under 2 hours, for sure.
If I don't choose to watch What Lies Beneath right after this, I'm definitely finishing Impromptu.
That's a good double feature. Impromptu right into What Lies Beneath.
And I'll be following all of this woman's other work. Now, do you think Impromptu would make a good musical if we needed to revisit?
Yes, I actually kind of think it would. You just tighten that book up a little bit.
All of the characters are there.
In fact, some of the scenes I think I would prefer if they were singing right now.
At certain points, I genuinely was like, I think they're about to.
Mm-hmm.
Like when they got on stage all dressed as clowns and were making fun of people, I was like, that's a great scene.
It's hard to say, like, trying to rewrite history. Like, is there a world in which this comes out 2 years before, 2 years after, and becomes a huge hit? Should Life of Mikey been his first movie instead of this movie? Would that have changed the trajectory of James Lapine's career? I have no idea. This as a first film, I think, is one of those ones that even the best directors have those, like, ones where they're starting out, where it's like, well, this one didn't hit as much as the rest of your work.
And yeah, I think in terms of a piece of work, I think he acquits himself quite well as a first-time director.
Yeah.
That is
actually true. I don't know if I would have been able to pick up that this was a first-time director while watching this.
He gets really solid performances. The camera isn't distracting. It certainly isn't like, to your point, the second half does drag to the point of like, you almost wonder you can't even pay attention at certain points.
Yeah.
Because it's just scenes of her riding around on a horse, truly stalking him.
Yeah, so true.
But it's not like a fast montage. It's a montage played over like 20 minutes.
Yeah, there's some good bits in here. It's not a complete waste of time, to be honest. And I would maybe say, if you are like a big George Sand fan, maybe there's just more to this that those people will pick up on that I just didn't.
Yeah, maybe it's like when I saw Here Lies Love, and I think like Filipino people were enjoying it a lot more because they were seeing intricacies that I just simply didn't get. So if you're a George Sand head, there might be little Easter eggs all throughout this movie for you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any final thoughts on Impromptu?
I think the only I do have a note here, which is like, why do we keep cutting to these damn kids?
Right.
And that's more of an existential question to the world, maybe.
A son and daughter, and the daughter gets misgendered a couple times throughout it. So,
and they're constantly blowing stuff up, and
yeah, real pieces of shit, if I can just say.
Terrible children, just terrible.
Yeah. Children should be seen and not heard. These really
kids needed. I'm really enjoying these kids off-camera work.
By the way, if someone did put like a cherry bomb in my fireplace and it exploded and I got like 2nd-degree burns.
It looked like their whole home had been given the injuries they had. I was like, do they have a home?
Yeah. Did they just not face criminal charges? Did they not throw these kids in the brig or something like that?
No.
I feel like there should have been some consequences.
And I loved that scene. I thought their acting there was great. And I thought, if you made this movie now, Emma Thompson would still play that role. And let's get the actor who plays Ron Swanson on Parks and Rec and her as her husband. I was just like, I was basically, the whole movie, I was like, should we remake Impromptu?
I think so, because, I mean, there's good legs here. That whole, her husband and her dynamic is so funny to me because he's like, I'm going to the hunting. He's like, but our guests are almost here. It's like, exactly. And that's why I'm leaving. It's like,
then, of course, he is. And then you get like a Shakespearean as you like it moment where he doesn't understand George's gender. And I was like, this is a farce.
Yeah, it's almost like screaming to be a farce and then doesn't really commit to that premise. Yeah.
We need this to be on stage. And I don't, James Lapine, you should write to him and just say, get to work.
Hey, JL, Kyle here.
I would be in the front row opening night for Impromptu, the musical.
I think it should be reclaimed somehow. I would love to hear, though, from people out there if you are like the biggest Impromptu fan. I mean, the most people voted for this. So there must be some fans that are out there. They're like, we love Impromptu, this unsung classic of the early 90s.
And I do think it is because you put like who's in it in parentheticals. And I think most people just saw Bernadette Peters and were like, that one. Yeah. I think I'm the biggest Impromptu fan now. But if you are a bigger fan, please write to me. I want to talk about this movie more.
Can I just say this? So I use this app called Letterboxd to track all my films that I watch. And it tells you how many people have actually watched this film. And as of this recording, only
I'm getting tears in my eyes.
Just under 2,500 people have watched Impromptu. So
that's a lot more than I thought you were going to say. I thought it was going to be like 10. But on Letterboxd, that's nothing. I feel like the rest of them are all in the millions.
Yeah. To put it into perspective, though, let's see. I think
Shawshank
Life
Redemption.
of Mikey has 5,000 people who have watched it. The other one called Earthly Possessions has 301.
How about the Viola one?
And the Viola Davis one, which is called Custody, has 515 people have logged that film.
And that's Oscar winner Viola Davis.
That's Oscar winner Viola Davis. Does she not deserve to be in a movie that more than 500 people have seen?
I'm just personally feeling, what was I doing? I feel like I need to go back and look at my calendar. What did I have going on when that was released?
Yeah.
I am the target audience for a movie directed by James Lapine starring Viola Davis.
My guess is probably anything. You're probably doing anything else.
Was it released on Quibi? Where did it come out?
I wonder. Maybe it was a Quibi original. Who
yeah,
knows?
Maybe it was released on platforms I'm simply don't have, like Cracker Jack boxes, Reddit. I may have not been able to get to it.
I'm stealing this line from a comedian, but we are living in an age where sometimes people will say, have you seen this movie or seen this TV show? It's streaming. And not only have I not heard of the movie, I've also not heard of the streaming service they're talking about. So it's it could be possible. It's just something like that.
True. Although I've got all of them. I'm the one person subscribed to Paramount Plus.
Hey, you're keeping them in business, I guess.
And I think they're just going to give me my money back and be like, we don't want you anymore. We're going away.
You get an email with the subject line, we think this is a mistake.
Yeah, please leave. We've done everything we can to get you to stop giving us money.
All right, Christopher, thank you so much for doing this. If people wanted to stay in contact with you and see what you're up to, is there a way to do so online?
Sure, you can follow me at clewis1219 on Instagram. And if you're at all interested in the Sex and the City cinematic universe and just like that, the wild, honestly impromptu-esque spinoff of Sex and the City, or Next Chapter, you can listen to my podcast with my friend Sam Bush, and it is called Shortcomings, and it's available where you listen to podcasts.
The legacy sequel TV show of Sex and the City. Like, I do know it is a thing, but every time people post about it, I'm like, you're making this up. That didn't actually happen, right?
I recently, while we were recording, had to say the sentence, well, then Miranda and Che Diaz had dinner with Tony Danza. And even I was like, what the fuck am I talking about?
What am I doing with my life?
And then it was like, well, then Tony Danza had to take Che to the side and tell them that they're really concerned about being canceled for playing a Mexican man. It's like, what? Why is this happening on a Sex and the City?
Mr. Danza, you have better things to do with your life. There has to be.
It's a fever dream of a show, and it's my favorite show currently airing on television. And I want everyone listening to this as a parting. I do have taste and like dignity. Because I'm like, I love Impromptu.
But sometimes trash is good.
And honestly, I would like Impromptu to either be much better or much worse. Right now, it's living in a middle space that I'm not comfortable with.
That's the final thing I'll say about it. Is like, that's almost the most disappointing thing, that I did leave it being like, I'm going to forget about this movie because I either wanted this to be the best thing or the worst thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. And it's neither.
And I think a lot of people feel that way about some of James's other work. You know, I have a lot of friends who don't care for Sunday in the Park with George, and I hate them.